May 1941. The Atlantic Ocean becomes the stage for one of the most dramatic naval chases in history. A single German battleship threatens to destroy Britain's lifeline to America. What follows is a hunt that will span thousands of miles, involve dozens of warships, and end in one of the most spectacular naval battles ever fought. This is the story of the Bismarck Hunt, the naval chase that shocked the world. The Bismarck was not just a warship, it was a symbol of German naval power. Launched on February 14, 1939, she was named after Otto von Bismarck, the architect of German unification. At 50,000 tons fully loaded, she was one of the largest battleships ever built. 8 15-inch guns in 4 turrets gave her devastating firepower. Her armour belt was up to 12.6 inches thick, making her virtually impenetrable to most naval weapons of the era. The ship's construction represented the pinnacle of German engineering. She could reach speeds of 30 knots, making her faster than most British battleships. Her fire control systems were among the most advanced in the world. But more than her technical specifications, Bismarck represented Hitler's ambition to challenge British naval supremacy. In May 1941, Admiral Gunther Lutyens received orders for Operation Rheinübung Rhine exercise. The plan was audacious: break out into the Atlantic and attack Allied convoy routes. Accompanying Bismarck would be the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. Together they would wreak havoc on the merchant ships, bringing vital supplies to Britain. On May 18, 1941, Bismarck and Prinz Eugen departed from Gotenhafen in occupied Poland. The mission was to avoid direct confrontation with British warships and instead target defenceless merchant vessels. But the British were watching. Swedish intelligence spotted the German squadron, and the alert was sent to London. At the Admiralty in London, the news sent shockwaves through the command structure. First, Sea Lord Admiral Sir Dudley Pound immediately ordered the home fleet to intercept. The stakes could not be higher. If Bismarck reached the Atlantic convoy routes, she could sink dozens of merchant ships, severing Britain's lifeline to North America. Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland was given command of the interception force. His flagship was HMS Hood, Britain's own pride of the fleet. At 42,000 tons, Hood was the world's largest battlecruiser and a symbol of British naval power for over 2 decades. Accompanying Hood was the new battleship HMS Prince of Wales, still so fresh from the shipyard that civilian workers were still aboard completing her systems. On May 21st, reconnaissance aircraft confirmed that Bismarck had been spotted near Bergen, Norway, but the next day she disappeared. The British faced a critical decision. Which route would the Germans take? There were 3 possibilities around Iceland to the north, through the Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland, or back through the North Sea. Admiral Holland gambled on the Denmark Strait, the most direct route to the Atlantic. It was a narrow passage made even more treacherous by fog, icebergs, and pack ice. On the evening of May 23, 1941, the heavy cruisers HMS Suffolk and HMS Norfolk were patrolling the strait when Suffolk's radar detected a contact. It was Bismarck. Dawn on May 24, 1941, broke cold and grey over the Denmark Strait. At 5:35 a.m., lookouts aboard for HMS Hood spotted Bismarck at a range of 17 miles. Admiral Holland immediately ordered his ships to engage. Hood and Prince of Wales turned toward the enemy at 28 knots, with Hood in the lead. But Holland made a critical tactical error. He approached the German ships nearly head-on, exposing his ship's vulnerable bows while limiting his own firepower. Only the forward guns could fire, while Bismarck and Prinz Eugen could use their full broadsides. At 5:52 a.m., Hood opened fire. Seconds later, Bismarck and Prinz Eugen returned fire. The range closed rapidly. Massive shells weighing over a ton screamed through the air. Geysers of water erupted around both British and German ships as shells fell short or long. Prince of Wales was hit several times but remained in the fight. Then came the catastrophic moment that would shock the world. At 6 a.m., after just 8 minutes of battle, disaster struck HMS Hood. A salvo from Bismarck, possibly a single shell from her fifth salvo, penetrated Hood's deck armour. The shell plunged deep into the ship, reaching her aft ammunition magazine. The explosion was catastrophic. A massive fireball erupted from Hood's deck, shooting flames hundreds of feet into the air. Her back broke. Within seconds, the Pride of the Royal Navy split in two. Her bow rose into the air briefly, then she plunged beneath the waves. From the first hit to her disappearance beneath the surface took less than 3 minutes. Of Hood's crew of 1,418 men, only 3 survived. Vice Admiral Holland went down with his ship. On Prince of Wales, officers watched in horror and disbelief, the unsinkable Hood gone in an instant. Prince of Wales continued to fight alone against both German ships, but she was taking heavy damage. Several of her guns had jammed due to mechanical problems. She was simply too new. Captain John Leach made the painful decision to break off the engagement and retreat behind a smokescreen. But the Battle of the Denmark Strait was not a complete German victory. Prince of Wales had scored 3 hits on Bismarck before withdrawing. One shell struck below the waterline, rupturing fuel tanks and causing Bismarck to leave a telltale oil slick. Another penetrated a boiler room. Bismarck was losing fuel and her speed was reduced. Admiral Lutyens faced a critical decision: continue with the mission into the Atlantic or return to port for repairs. The fuel situation was becoming critical. He decided to make for Saint-Nazaire, the German-controlled port in occupied France, but first he had to shake off the British ships that were shadowing him. News of Hood's destruction sent shockwaves throughout Britain and the world. Winston Churchill was awakened with the news and immediately grasped its implications. If Bismarck could destroy Hood, no convoy was safe. He issued a simple order to the Admiralty: sink the Bismarck. Every available British warship in the Atlantic was directed toward the hunt. Admiral John Tovey, commander of the Home Fleet, steamed south in his flagship HMS King George V, accompanied by the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious. From Gibraltar, Force H under Admiral James Somerville began racing north, including the battlecruiser HMS Renown and the carrier HMS Ark Royal. The heavy cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk maintained radar contact, shadowing Bismarck from a safe distance. They reported her every move to the converging British forces. The net was tightening, but Bismarck was still a formidable opponent and had shown she could sink even Britain's mightiest ships. On the evening of May 24th, Victorious launched 9 Swordfish torpedo bombers. These biplanes, nicknamed string bags, looked obsolete fabric-covered aircraft that seemed to belong to World War I rather than 1941. But they were tough and reliable, and their pilots were determined. Flying through terrible weather, the Swordfish found Bismarck around 11:30 p.m. They pressed home their attack through intense anti-aircraft fire. One torpedo struck Bismarck on her armoured belt, causing minor damage, but the psychological effect was significant. The German crew now knew they were being hunted by air as well as sea. During the night, Lutyens decided to detach Prinz Eugen. The cruiser would continue independently while Bismarck drew off the pursuers. It was a sound tactical decision, but it meant Bismarck would face the rest of her ordeal alone. In the early hours of May 25th, disaster struck the British pursuit. Through a series of navigation errors and confusion, the shadowing cruisers lost radar contact with Bismarck. For the British, it was a nightmare. The most dangerous warship in the world had vanished into the vast Atlantic. Admiral Lutyens, however, made a critical mistake. Unaware that he had shaken off his pursuers, he broke radio silence to send a long message to German Naval Command. British direction-finding stations intercepted the transmission. Though they couldn't read the coded message, they could triangulate Bismarck's position. But there was a problem. An error in calculating the position placed Bismarck heading back toward the Denmark Strait rather than toward France. For precious hours, British ships steamed in the wrong direction. It seemed Bismarck might escape after all. At 10:30 a.m. on May 26th, an American-built Catalina flying boat took off from Northern Ireland on a routine patrol. At the controls were Flying Officer Dennis Briggs and U.S. Navy observer Ensign Leonard Smith. America was still neutral but helping Britain locate German ships. Through breaks in the clouds, they spotted a ship's wake. Flying lower through heavy anti-aircraft fire, they confirmed the sighting. It was Bismarck, only 690 miles from the safety of Brest, France, and under Luftwaffe air cover. The Catalina's signal went out, one battleship course 150 degrees, speed 20 knots. The hunt was on again, but there was a problem. Bismarck was now closer to France than most of the pursuing British ships were to her. Only one British force had a chance of slowing her down, Force H, coming up from Gibraltar with the carrier Ark Royal. Time was running out. Admiral Tovey calculated that if Bismarck wasn't slowed down by nightfall on May 26th, she would reach air cover from the Luftwaffe and safety in France. Everything depended on Ark Royal's Swordfish torpedo bombers. The first strike at 2:50 p.m. nearly ended in disaster. Through a tragic mix-up, the Swordfish attacked HMS Sheffield, a British cruiser, shadowing Bismarck instead of their intended target. Fortunately, the magnetic detonators malfunctioned, and Sheffield escaped damage. But precious time had been lost. At 7:10 p.m., 15 Swordfish launched for a second attack. This time they would use contact detonators. Flying through a storm, with visibility near zero and winds reaching 50 knots, the Swordfish found Bismarck. The battleship's anti-aircraft guns opened up, filling the sky with shells and tracer fire. The slow-flying Swordfish pressed their attack through the barrage. As the Swordfish attacked from multiple directions, Bismarck manoeuvred violently, her guns blazing. Several torpedoes missed or hit her heavily armoured belt. Then, at approximately 9 p.m., one torpedo struck Bismarck's stern, the most catastrophic hit possible. The torpedo detonated near Bismarck's rudders and steering gear. The force of the explosion jammed the rudders at a 12-degree angle to port. Damage control teams worked frantically, but the steering gear was beyond repair. Bismarck could no longer steer a straight course. She began steaming in circles and then settled on a course heading directly toward the pursuing British battleships. On Bismarck's bridge, the realization set in. They couldn't steer, couldn't outrun their pursuers, and couldn't reach France. Admiral Lutyens sent a message to German Naval Command: "Ship unmaneuverable, we shall fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." Through the night of May 26-27, Bismarck steamed helplessly while British warships converged on her position. Aboard the doomed battleship, the crew prepared for their final battle. Some wrote last letters home, others gathered photographs of loved ones. Many simply waited for dawn. Admiral Lutyens addressed the crew, praising their courage. Captain Ernst Lindemann ordered the battle ensign raised. Bismarck would go down fighting under her flag. The crew worked to prepare demolition charges, determined that if they couldn't save their ship, the British wouldn't capture her intact. 5 British destroyers found Bismarck during the night and launched torpedo attacks. Several hit, causing further damage and casualties. But they couldn't sink her. That task would fall to the battleships King George V and HMS Rodney, racing through the night to reach Bismarck at first light. Dawn broke on May 27, 1941, revealing a grey, heaving sea. At 8:47 a.m., HMS Rodney opened fire at a range of 25,000 yards. Within moments, King George V joined in. Bismarck returned fire immediately, her first salvo landing close to Rodney. But with her steering gone, she couldn't manoeuvre to avoid incoming shells or aim effectively. The British battleships pounded Bismarck mercilessly. At 9:02 a.m., a shell from Rodney struck Bismarck's forward turrets, penetrating and causing massive explosions inside. Within minutes, all of Bismarck's main turrets were silenced, but she remained afloat, her heavy armour protecting her hull even as her superstructure was torn apart. The heavy cruisers HMS Norfolk and HMS Dorsetshire joined the bombardment. Bismarck had become a blazing wreck, her decks swept by fire, her guns silent, but still she floated. Admiral Tovey, running low on fuel, ordered Dorsetshire to finish her with torpedoes. At 10:15 a.m. the order came to abandon ship. The German crew began setting off demolition charges to scuttle their ship. Dorsetshire fired 2 torpedoes into Bismarck's starboard side, then moved around and fired another into her port side. Bismarck began to list heavily. At 10:39 a.m., Bismarck capsized and sank. She rolled over to port, her propellers rising into the air, then plunged beneath the waves. Of her crew of 2,200 men, only 115 survived. Admiral Lutyens and Captain Lindemann went down with their ship, along with over 2,000 sailors. Dorsetshire and the destroyer HMS Maure began picking up survivors from the oil-covered water. But after rescuing only about 110 men, a U-boat alarm caused the British ships to withdraw, leaving hundreds of German sailors to their fate in the freezing Atlantic. A German U-boat and weather ship later rescued 5 more survivors. The sinking of Bismarck marked a turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. Germany never again attempted a major surface raid on Atlantic convoy routes. The Kriegsmarine's remaining large ships would spend most of the war in Norwegian fjords, tying down British resources but never achieving their intended purpose. For Britain, the victory came at a terrible cost. HMS Hood and nearly 1,500 sailors were lost, but the successful hunt proved that Britain could still control the seas, even against Germany's most powerful weapons. Churchill called it a great relief, and the Royal Navy's prestige, damaged by Hood's loss, was restored. The hunt for Bismarck had involved over 100 ships and numerous aircraft. It demonstrated the importance of radar, aircraft carriers, and intelligence in modern naval warfare. The age of the battleship was ending, though few realized it at the time. For nearly 5 decades, Bismarck lay undisturbed on the floor of the Atlantic. Then, in June 1989, oceanographer Dr. Robert Ballard, the same man who had found the Titanic 4 years earlier, located the wreck using advanced sonar equipment. Bismarck lies at a depth of 15,719 feet, approximately 400 miles west of Brest, France. The wreck is remarkably intact, sitting upright on the seabed. Her main turrets have fallen off, lying around the hull. The damage from the final battle is evident, but so is the strength of her armour. Many shells failed to penetrate her heavily protected hull. The discovery confirmed that Bismarck was scuttled by her crew rather than sunk purely by British gunfire and torpedoes. Examination of the hull showed that the British attacks had caused devastating topside damage, but that the hull itself had been breached from the inside. The German crew had succeeded in denying the British a capture, even in defeat. The hunt for Bismarck remains one of the most dramatic naval operations in history. It was a chase that spanned thousands of miles, involved dozens of ships and aircraft, and claimed nearly 3,500 lives. In just 8 days, the pride of the Kriegsmarine went from an unstoppable threat to a shattered wreck on the ocean floor. Today, Bismarck rests as a war grave, protected by international law. She is a monument to the courage of the sailors on both sides, men who fought and died doing their duty. The hunt for Bismarck reminds us of the human cost of war and the thin line between victory and defeat in naval combat. The story of Bismarck's final voyage continues to fascinate historians and naval enthusiasts around the world. It was a naval chase that truly shocked the world, and its lessons about naval strategy, technology, and human courage remain relevant to this day.